Well, good morning. I have to admit, I flew down here from Seattle last night, and I woke up this morning and looked out the window and I saw the clouds, and I thought I hadn't left at all. I was still in Seattle. But it's a great honor for me to join you this morning and to be here on the 7th conference for the US-Japan Council. We at Microsoft appreciate the important role that the Council has been playing since 2008, a role that, as all of you know, takes two vital parts of the world and finds a way for us to bring them closer together. In fact, Japan and the United States may be an ocean apart, but I know that all of us appreciate the key role that our two countries have been playing together for several decades, a role that is focused not only on helping to grow the economy and create jobs on both sides of the Pacific, but to help contribute to a world that is more peaceful and secure as well. It's also a real honor for me to follow the chairman of Hitachi and talk a little bit about a similar topic, the dawn of the next industrial revolution, and what it means for all of us in this room, but more importantly, what it means, I believe, for people in Japan and the United States. I think it helps to start by thinking about the technologies themselves that are driving this new industrial revolution. In fact, they fall into three key categories. There are innovations in the physical world. Innovations we're already starting to see with autonomous vehicles and new materials and 3D printing and robotics. But that's really just one slice of what's clearly coming. A second is advances in the world of biology. Advances in genetic engineering and genomics are going to change not only human health, but agriculture and the care of livestock. And finally, there are the advances that are most familiar to so many of us here, especially those of you who live and work in Silicon Valley. The changes in the digital world, the IoT that you just heard about, new technologies like blockchain, new disruptive business models that are giving birth to new companies like Uber and Lyft and Handy, and literally changing the economy before our eyes. All of these technologies, all of these advances that you see on this slide have one thing in common. They're all powered by cloud computing and the massive advances in mathematical calculations and the use of big data in machine learning that are at the core of everything else. That's one of the reasons that we in Microsoft have focused on investments in this area, not just in the United States, but in Japan, with our opening of 2 large data centers in Japan over the past year. It's why we're focused on partnering with others as we think about the advances we're going to see across the economy. Certainly for a country like Japan, the opportunities in the automobile sector are enormous. We've taken the technology that we've developed in so many of the components that are creating new connected cars, and we're using that not to build cars ourselves. We've said that's not something we want to do, but we're using that to partner with other companies, companies like Toyota, companies like Renault Nissan, as we think about the future and the growth path for connected cars. Cars that are connected navigationally, cars that are always connected to the internet, cars that bring into the automobile a lot of the technology we've become accustomed to in our home. And ultimately, of course, cars that will drive themselves. We believe in the promise of artificial intelligence to make life better, not only for people and vehicles, but for every aspect of humanity. But there's a second aspect that is worth touching upon as well, and I think it's especially fitting to talk about this on a day like today, on a week like this week, after such a historic election here in the United States that, as people have mentioned, makes the future a little more difficult to predict. The reality is that with all of these opportunities, there also come challenges. And if we're going to succeed in promoting better ties between Japan and the United States, if we're going to succeed in helping to move the world forward, we need to make sure that technology can move forward without leaving people behind. I think that core concern and even anxiety about being left behind is a factor that we're seeing in country after country around the world this year. We've tried to think about this as a company. We've thought about and shared our ideas in a book that we published, A Cloud for Global Good. And in it, we've articulated a few key points. First, we believe we need to act with a sense of shared responsibility. The issues before us today require that those of us in the private sector step up and accept a new level of responsibility. It requires that people in government step up and adopt new solutions. It requires that we work together across civil society with nonprofit organizations. And it requires that we think about the opportunity to pursue shared goals. In our view, there are three goals that are paramount. We need to build a future. We need to build a future for technology where the cloud and all of the technologies that trust it are trusted, responsible, and inclusive. And it's worth thinking a little bit about each of these three. It really does start with trust. As we talk to customers around the world, as I listen to customers in Japan, what I hear over and over is that people want the kind of protection they have had for information that has been stored on paper to persist as their information moves to digital form and into the cloud. And as we think about that, we've got to be prepared to step forward. That's why we as a company have even brought litigation 4 times against our own government, the United States government, to basically ensure that we can continue to live in a world where governments respect each other's borders, respect each other's sovereignty, respect each other's laws. When we found that the US government, through a unilateral search warrant, was trying to obtain data, emails that belong to customers in Europe and that reside exclusively in our data center in Ireland and Amsterdam, we brought a case arguing that that went too far. Even though at the same time we're among the first companies to say we need a world where data can move across borders. So we need to find a way for data to move, but for people's rights to move with them. Now, thankfully, we recently won the case that we brought. We won that this past summer. And that gives us the opportunity to assure people around the world that they will, in fact, be protected by their own laws. But even while we provide that reassurance, we need to take new steps to keep information secure, to fight cybercrime, which is becoming more varied and in many ways a bigger challenge before our eyes. And if we're going to do all of this and do it well, it means we're going to need new forms of international collaboration. We're going to need new ties based on international law. And just as the United States this year negotiated a new agreement on a bilateral basis with the United Kingdom, both to protect people's privacy, but to ensure that law enforcement can get access to the information it needs to do its job, we will need new ties across the Pacific between the United States and Japan as well. Of course, we can't stop there. We also need to build a future based on a cloud that is responsible. We need to recognize in the technology sector the important work we have in front of us to keep people safe online. We need to recognize that those of us that are running data centers around the world have suddenly become among the world's largest consumers of electricity. And we need to keep shifting as we are to a greater use of renewable energy. We need to take new steps to ensure that the cloud is put to work to address urgent needs to help people recover from disasters. In the wake of the most recent earthquake earlier this year in Japan, there were suddenly 15,000 people that had no electricity. There were 25,000 homes without heat. And yet cloud computing was able to help direct people to the resources they need and the places they could go for safety. It's just one example of the kinds of things we can do more of and need to do more to address. Finally, I think there's the most important issue of all, the issue of the year, perhaps the issue of our time. How do we ensure that we contribute to a world and an era of inclusive economic growth. How do we ensure that this new technology helps small companies as well as large ones? How can we help the small businesses of Japan, which historically have not been always at the forefront in the use of information technology, use this new cloud era, not only to bring more products to new markets, but to help employ people in new ways, as people are starting to do with new forms of telework. We need to find new ways to bring this technology to rural communities. And perhaps as much as anything, we, especially in the tech sector, need to ensure that this technology is serving the 1.2 billion people on this planet that have some kind of disability. People with great potential in their lives, but people who rely on technology as much or more than anyone else to do their work and to connect with those around them. We need to recognize that in a time of change, the only way an economy can be a healthy economy is if it's a learning economy. The only way we'll continue not only to create jobs, but to create opportunities for people to fill them is to help equip people with the skills they will need for the future. It's why it's so important that in Japan and in the United States and around the world, we find new ways to invest in all generations, and perhaps especially the next generation of people. There came a day when around the world people learned and realized, they recognized everywhere, that if you wanted to succeed, you needed to be able to read, you needed to be able to write, you needed to be able to count, and yet in the future, what we've also realized is that at least to some degree, people are going to need to learn to code, or at least understand some of the basics of computer science that will contribute to this century in the same way that physics did to the advances of the 20th century. That's why we're excited to partner with others in Japan on a new initiative that's been launched in recent months. It's called Programming for All. It's designed to make available the opportunity to code and learn computer science to students across Japan. Just in the last month, we've had the opportunity to connect with policymakers and teachers, to train more people who work in schools, to reach more students who go to school every day. It is these kids that can give us optimism for the future. But more than that, I think here in Silicon Valley, in Tokyo, across the United States and across Japan, we need to recognize that these are the issues that we will need to address. It will require that we in the tech sector think more broadly and accept a higher level of responsibility. It will require that we find a new path through a period of new uncertainty. But above all, I think it gives us the opportunity to start this conference by reflecting on and perhaps even being inspired by our opportunity to work together to address these issues head on and create a brighter future for the United States and Japan. Thank you very much.